I am the lion now. Margaret took a bath. The tub, like all tubs in apartments worth living in, was grimy. She had scrubbed it many times, but the porcelain remained gray and streaked with rust around the drain. She didn't mind. She also kissed dogs on the mouth, didn't wash her fruit. Let the squeamish suffer their fear, let them live without really living. Margaret was safe in her risk-taking. In the kitchen, Toby baked a cake, his second, the first one had burned. Margaret had assumed he'd forgotten to turn on the timer, but this was deliberate. He'd wanted to have sex, more than he wanted to eat cake, and he knew that if the timer went off in the middle, they would stop to handle it. They were married, and passion was not greater than cake. But they didn't end up having sex, and the cake burned anyway. Toby felt silly, and a little disappointed by his carelessness. The average married couple in Los Angeles has sex once a week. The number increases among newlyweds and decreases considerably among those with children. Margaret and Toby, married 4 years, together for 6, were not doing badly. Margaret kept a tally of their lovemaking in her checkbook. Toby wasn't aware of the tally, wasn't aware that their average was higher than the norm during the fall and lower in the summer, bikini wax or not. Heat wasn't sexy. Margaret sometimes imagined a future biographer, their biographer, celebrating the discovery of this diligent record. She didn't realize that no one was recording the more important matters. Toby's baking, for instance. That he was making a second cake 2 hours after the first, simply because his wife had a craving. In the bathroom, a candle next to the sink glowed weakly, a gesture of light. Margaret lay in the tub with her eyes closed, the book she had brought into the room admonished nearby. It was a turgid novel, too challenging to read in water. Margaret longed for a tabloid, all those pregnant actresses. But I am worth it, whispered the book. Because the smell of burned food lingers, Toby had opened the front door and all the windows. As he'd begun to stir the second batch of dry ingredients, Margaret had said, I feel fat. I'm going to take a bath. You're not fat, Toby said. You're pregnant. My arms aren't, she said. Margaret was 3.5 months along, she'd recently purchased a maternity wardrobe, even though she didn't need it quite yet. Toby found the smock dresses, and the shirts like parachutes, sexy. For some reason, taking a bath temporarily cleansed his wife of any physical self-loathing. In water she was weightless, and afterward, she put on the same extra-large t-shirt, its size dwarfing her, making her feel thin. The baby inside her liked the sound of the running faucet, and the shaking and groan of the pipes. He heard everything, and tucked the information like loose change into his forming brain. The sound was like a handful of paper clips scattering across the hardwood floor. A scampering. From the kitchen Toby yelled, holy fucking shit. Margaret stood up, feet in bathwater. What was that? She called, her ear toward the door. She heard the rustling of paper bags, the 2 next to the garbage, used for recycling. Are you okay? She yelled. The baby moved, but he was too small for Margaret to notice. There's a fucking rat in here. Toby cried. Boyish cowardice tugged at the edge of his voice. Margaret heard a kitchen chair slide across the floor and she imagined Toby standing on it. She grabbed her towel from the rack, pulling it so strongly that it hit the candle, tipping it over, onto the book. The book caught fire. Fire, she yelled. Possum. Toby yelled. He hadn't heard his wife in the bathroom. The possum, a baby, ran back and forth across the kitchen, butting its head against the cabinets and the fridge. It did look like a rat, but an obese one, pink-eyed, with that same root vegetable tail. The book's pages went first, curling black with the lick of fire, then disintegrating. The covers were cloth, and thus more stubborn, but it didn't take long for the flames to cover the entire book, eating it. The room turned orange with the glow, and Margaret thought first of that Ray Bradbury novel, then of the Nazis, then of death, then of the first cake, which had also burned, then of the baby. Oh, not my baby, then of death again. As the possum ran for the living room, Toby realized what had happened. Abandoned by its mother, the animal needed food, and the burned cake smell had been inviting. A coyote might be next in the hunger parade, might come skulking through the front door, which was still open. The possum ran behind the couch. Food, food, food. Margaret plunged her towel into the tub of water, and, once it was soaked through, flung it over the flames, suffocating them. The book stopped burning. Where was Toby? Fire, she yelled again, testing him. Toby smelled the fire just as he heard Margaret's call. Burned book wasn't the same as burned cake. At 7 years old, he and his brothers had thrown a lit match to a pile of their mother's collection of romance novels. The flames leaped from the paperbacks to a nearby bush, swallowing it with a roar of heat. Later, when the firefighters were leaving, one of them said to him, "Be careful there, Moses," and Toby had nodded, confused. Who was this Moses? Toby wasn't thinking of this as he ran for the bathroom, only of his actions. The jumping off of the chair, the pushing in of the bathroom door, the reaching out for Margaret, who was naked and dousing something charred in the sink. The breathlessness of, "Are you all right, babe?" What happened? Margaret laughed. "Oops," she said. "Guess I won't be reading this." All crises, once averted, become jokes. "Did you burn yourself?" I'm fine. Toby kissed his wife on the mouth and on the belly. "There's a small beast in the living room." The timer shrilled. "Cake. Come quick," Toby said, already out of the bathroom. "I might contract rabies." Toby pulled the cake out of the oven before attending to the possum, which he could hear rustling behind the couch, scratching at the walls. If the possum couldn't behave like a human being, why not run outside, where it belonged? "Dig, dig, dig," said the possum. It came out as a snort. Margaret thought she heard a suppressed roar coming from the kitchen. Before the turgid novel, she'd been reading a book about the history of Al-Qaeda. In it, the author told about Taliban members who had broken into an Afghan zoo. One man decreed the bear's beard too short and cut off the animal's nose. Another zealot leaped into the lion's den yelling, "I am the lion now." The lion killed him. The noseless bear survived. When Margaret had first read that passage, she'd been appalled. Those kinds of men had to be contained. The longer she spent away from the book, though, the more the lesson changed. Now she thought the story meant something else entirely. Such as, do not underestimate the strength of animals. When Margaret was a girl, her father called her mother Mama Bear, as in, "Go ask Mama Bear what's for dinner," or, "Mama Bear's going to tuck you in tonight." But her mother was cornstalk thin, not like a bear at all, and Margaret never followed her father's lead. With oven mitts on his hands, Toby knelt on the floor. "Come here, little possum," he said. "Don't be afraid." The possum crouched next to the couch, a few inches from the wall. He sat on his hind legs like the smallest squirrel, his pink nose twitching. The white of his face was heart-shaped. "Where's your mommy?" Toby asked. He meant to swipe at the animal, to push it closer to the open door, but the possum only sniffed the oven mitt. "Smell, smell, smell." "Hey, buddy," Toby whispered, something in his chest opening. The possum opened its mouth briefly, as if to yawn, or smile. Its tongue was the same shade of pink as its nose. It did not run, nor did it play dead like other possums when afraid. This possum had only been separated from its mother for an hour or so, but it had already forgotten all the ways of its species. It wasn't afraid. Toby leaned forward and picked up the animal, who rolled into a ball in the palm of the oven mitt. "Hi, baby." The possum was 2 months old. When it was born, hairless, blind, without legs, it was the size of a sugar cube. "Hello, hello," Toby whispered. "Do you need help?" The possum emitted a soft, sleepy growl. Margaret walked into the kitchen wearing her extra-large t-shirt, her hair combed and twisted into a bun. She didn't want to be chasing a wild animal, a beast with rabies, perhaps, in nothing but a towel and a mess of dripping hair. If the animal urinated or spit on the floor, how would they distinguish it from the bathwater? She grabbed the broom from the pantry. She would sweep the animal out the front door like so much dust. "Ready," she said. But Toby had already swaddled the possum in a dish towel and now cradled the animal in his arms. The oven mitts waited on the counter, next to the 2 cakes, the edible and the burned. "What are you doing?" Margaret said, opening her hands. The broom fell like a guillotine blade onto the floor, and the sound made the possum tremble. Toby hushed the animal. "He's so sweet and docile." Margaret shook her head. "The human stain, Toby." She leaned into her husband, peering at the animal before drawing back. "You've marked him," she said. "Now he'll be shunned by the animal kingdom." "Listen to you," Toby said, bouncing the possum a little. "The animal kingdom? You sound like a PBS special." Toby drew his lips down in a pout, a sad clown. "He's fine, Mar, aren't you, little buddy?" "No," Margaret said. "He belongs in nature, not in here." "There was just a fire in the bathroom," Toby said. "There are no boundaries." "What are you talking about, no boundaries?" The possum burrowed into the dish towel. Warmth. Really, Margaret said. We have to get it out of here. Toby felt anger fizzing up in him. Sometimes his wife could be so cold. They often joked that once the baby was born, Toby would be the one to comfort it with a lullaby in the middle of the night. Margaret would handle the diapering and the discipline, the driving lessons. What she lacked in tenderness, he knew, she made up for with efficiency. He had accepted her flaws long ago, ever since their second date, when he realized he loved her, right after she'd insisted that he split the chef's salad with her. 2 plates please. Even though he didn't feel like a salad. Let's see how it goes, Toby said. Maybe we can keep him, like a pet? Even as he said it, he knew how stupid it sounded. But he kept going because there was something, a living creature, at stake. He's not like a skunk, you know, that stinks unless you take out that stink organ. Can't a possum be trained, like a dog? Toby did have a point. Margaret's grandparents had managed to domesticate a wolf on their farm in upstate New York. They'd found it as a cub, and her grandfather had taught it to howl at the moon. And, in the larger scheme of things, a possum was not a dangerous animal, maybe a little mean, but not dangerous. Toby and Margaret were not aware that just a few blocks west, in Little Armenia, a man kept a jaguar caged in his studio apartment. He fed it raw chicken. Or that dogs that had never lived among people did not care for people, and that they ate anything to survive, from cockroaches to half-alive pigeons. Margaret imagined walking a leashed possum down the street, or perhaps transporting it in a designer tote. She imagined cuddling with it, washing it in the bathtub. She could do this. Wasn't caring for animals the precursor to caring for babies? But then she remembered the red eyes, and their eerie chortling mating sound. The possum could bite her baby, eat him. She could not underestimate its strength, its animalness. You can keep it for one night, Margaret said. And then we'll let it go, or call someone. Toby, surprised, nodded. We have to find out what it eats. He grinned. I'm putting it in the cradle. This is so bad, Margaret said. She reached out and touched her husband's cheek. You're so bad. Let's have sex, Toby said. The possum, half asleep in a sleeve of Toby's sweatshirt, lay in the cradle, which Toby's mother had purchased online 5 minutes after she received the news that she would be a grandmother. The cradle now waited solemnly next to the bed, occasionally nudging in the breeze that drifted through the nearby window. Margaret and Toby rolled across the bed, naked. Toby wanted to be gentle with his wife, who had already begun to feel different in his arms, a little swollen. But Margaret didn't feel any different, or she felt different, but certainly not fragile, as Toby's whispery grasp suggested, and she wanted to prove this to him. She grabbed his waist and thought, I am the lion now. From afar they might have resembled college wrestlers, negotiating each other's bodies with warring agility. Except they kept whispering, I love you, and kissing. Both were thinking about the possum, but neither mentioned it. It was like their future baby, in the room, but not. There was something sexy about this. From the cradle, the possum breathed easily. The figures on the bed could have been clouds passing overhead. Afterward, Toby carried the possum to the living room while Margaret scavenged food for it in the kitchen. There were some raspberries in the fridge, their edges furry with mold. Worrying that the possum wouldn't take to these, Margaret also grabbed the milk and the turkey baster. She left the cakes for fear that the sugar content, and the chocolate, would be deadly. Toby rocked the possum back and forth as it batted at his chest. He already loved this animal, but he didn't say it out loud. Margaret screamed when she entered the room. Just behind the screen door watched a possum the size of an overweight cat, with long, guitar-string whiskers and a deranged grimace. Atop its back, her back, Margaret now realized, hung 3 babies. Siblings. Before this moment, Toby's back had been to the door, but now he turned to reveal the baby possum to its mother. She opened her mouth to flash rows of sharp teeth. She hissed. This meant, don't. Toby felt like he'd been caught shoplifting. Hurry up, Margaret whispered, before she attacks. Toby hugged the possum tighter, and it squirmed in his arms. The animal had begun to understand the difference between itself and the figure holding it. Give the baby back, Margaret said, her heart rate rising. Before Toby could act, his wife pulled open the door with one hand, and with the other, swooped in and grabbed the possum from him. She lifted the animal and launched it into the air. The possum, its 4 legs splayed out, flew out the door. Its mother followed the animal's trajectory with bright eyes. This was not the animal she'd been after. This was something else. Flight was not something she understood. Margaret kicked the screen door closed, then the front door, her heart galloping. The baby inside her sensed this unease, and he fell into it. His nervousness was born. "Wow," Toby said, not sure if he felt relieved or sad. With the door closed, they could not see the mother possum turn her back on the baby, which was no longer one of her own, no longer a possum, but meaningless as a bird, a hat, a doll, a pet. A few weeks later, Margaret is bigger and more sensitive to the smell of coffee and charcoal barbecues. The baby inside her has grown eyelids. Carrying a bag of groceries, Toby walks home. The sun was setting when he left the market, and by the time he reaches the front door, it's dark. He's nearly forgotten the possum, but sometimes he sends out hope that it's all right. The day after the incident, he'd looked up information about possums online. He and Margaret had done everything they weren't supposed to, touched the animal, talked to it. If Margaret had gone ahead and fed it the milk, it most certainly would have died. Toby reaches for his keys and the few potted plants by his feet rustle. Toby's eyes meet the possum's. It's certainly the same one, no longer so small, but not yet fully grown. A teenager now, Toby thinks, smiling. "Hey, bud," but he remembers the website's rule and shuts up. The possum glares at him and hisses. "I am the lion now." Toby hurries with his keys, his hands gone cold. He wrestles the door open and slips into the warm apartment, lit with lamps. He calls out for his wife, and, in his mind, for his child, who can hear him.